many of you are probably familiar with, you know, there's the network cable. It's that 4-wire cable, and it has that small connector that looks something like this on the back here. And I should have had a sample. Like I said, we'll take a look at it. But that connector is really important. It has the 4 wires in it, the red, white, blue, and black. Okay, and that connector is probably one of the more challenging things as far as when you're going to have issues with a component. It's probably going to be on those connectors there that connect the keypad to the control panel. Now, the connector itself, you don't need any tools for it all, and this is very important. Basically, you just take the 4 wires, line them up, red, white, blue, and black, and you can just look at any keypad. You'll see the order of that. You don't have to remember it, and of course, it's in our manual as well. You just line those up. So if you were putting an end, you had a damaged connector or a connector that wasn't terminated properly, and you were putting a new end on, you just take those 4 wires, red, white, blue, and black, you line them up, kind of just pinch them in your hand there, and they're probably going to end up being something like my finger here. You know, they're not going to be all even when you line them up. So you want to take a good pair of side cutters and just trim them flush. Now if you're doing this on this end of the cable, you'll want to make sure the system's turned off because that cable is going to be hot. Now if you did that, it's not necessarily going to blow anything up, but it's not good practice to do that because you're going to end up shorting some things out there. So you cut them flush and then put that connector on that looks something like this, and then just crimp down with a normal pair of pliers. Now it's best if you can use not something like side cutters or wire strippers that come together like this. If you can use a normal pair of pliers or some channel locks that come down more like this, then it crimps down nice and even on the whole connector, okay? So one thing that you don't do, a couple things that you don't do, you do not strip the individual wires. Okay, you strip the jacket on the cable about 1 inch back, and then line your wires up and trim it flush, and then put that connector on. Crimp it down evenly with those pliers, and you're going to be just fine. You want to make sure that the wires are fully inserted in the connector, so you don't have one that's a little short, because that's when you'll have an intermittent connection. So you trim them flush, push it all the way down, and then crimp that on with just a normal pair of pliers. You want to make sure that all 4 corners, there's that clearish green-blue part of the connector, you'll want to make sure that's crimped down fully. If you have one corner that's kind of popped up or cockeyed there, that means it's not fully crimped down. So you want to make sure that that's fully flat and crimped down. Like I said, after break here, I'll have a cable that you can pass around and see. That's probably one of the most common things. Now, you might say, oh, I wish they'd do it better in production, but you got to realize they're going through about 8,000 of those connectors a month. And, you might say, well, couldn't there be a connector that was more robust or something like that? This connector is very low profile. So a lot of times they have to fish these things through walls and things like that. So they need to be very low profile. So a bigger, say, waterproof connector would be quite bulky and large. Plus, you'd have to be stripping and crimping ends on each of those wires and then inserting them. So with this, there's no stripping, there's no crimping. You just shove those 4 wires in and crimp down evenly. But sometimes with the volume of production they're going through, we've got some tooling set up in the production department there now that's made things a little better. But there'll be a connector that wasn't fully crimped down. So it might make it through production and out into the field and end up back here because there's a keypad that's dead. So the first thing you want to do if you have a keypad that's dead is you could go to the parts department and order a new keypad, but you're just going to waste about 15 minutes in many cases if you don't try and go check that keypad in a different location. So we talked about this earlier. If you have that little pigtail, you can take it down to the control panel here and plug it in. If you're just doing a really quick test and you don't have the cable or you don't have time, one other thing you can do is take that keypad out of its current location where it's not working and go to another location that is working, plug it in there, and try it out. If it works there, you know it's not the keypad. So now you can focus on the cable. So the cable then, you'd look at the connector on either end here. So if you already had the switch panel out, this is probably the easiest one to just quickly check. Look, just look in the clearish part of the connector and you'll see if all 4 wires were inserted fully. If that looks good and seems fine, then you can go to the control panel end. Now, of course, Tiffin prints the name of each cable on the jacket of that cable. So if you're looking for the entry switch panel, you should be able to find it quite easily just by looking at the printing on the wiring there. So once you find that, you know, unplug the cable, take a look at that. Sometimes if they even look good, you know, you may want to just put a new end on either end. But that's just, now just a clarification on the connectors themselves. Over the years, we had started out with a blue connector made by 3M. And it was a kind of a bluish colored. Then there was a few issues with that one popping open, because the little part that crimps down is kind of a two-piece thing. And it seemed a little more sensitive to if there was some strain on the connector that it would pop open and the wires wouldn't be making good connection. So TE made a version that was green that many of you saw, and it was a one-piece part that the wires went into and crimped down on. The green version from TE was better in many ways. It had a little protector. There's a little locking tab here when you plug it in that locks in, and you just push that to release it. It was protected, so there were advantages to the TE. The issue with the TE connector was that it needed some special tools, or that's what was recommended, that not everybody on the line had, because some guys maybe on the line just needed to replace a connector quick. So there wasn't the proper tooling in place necessarily to make that happen. Once that tooling was put in place, things worked pretty better, and so that's what they're still using today. But for the service department here, where you've got a whole number of you that are working on these things, to have the tooling when the tool itself costs about $500, to have one for every person wasn't really feasible. So for service, you guys are set up here with the blue 3M connector again, which worked well with just a normal pair of pliers. So that's why you may wonder, you know, why am I using the blue one? The green one was what was on here. That's kind of the story behind that. So does that make sense? So again, just to summarize, the two big things to remember are, you know, make sure that these wires are trim flush and do not strip them. Okay, do not strip the wires. Just insert them in there in the right order and crimp down evenly, and you'll be fine. The other thing to remember is do not reuse the connectors. If you have a connector that you think might be, you know, something you want to try changing just to solve the issue, do not try to reopen it, shove the wires in further, or wiggle them around and re-crimp it. Okay, this type of connector is not made to be reused. So just go to the service department and get a new one. They're not that expensive, and you're going to waste a lot more time. Or it may work for now, but it's probably going to fail in the field. So reusing them is not something that we